Hi there, and welcome to another Meeting Keto question and answer session with myself, Coach Stephen, and the wonderful Keto Pro, Richard Smith. Good evening, Richard.
Way too kind as always. Thank you very much. Nice to see you too.
Well, it's true. And obviously, we've advertised that we've got Sally Norton coming on, and we're hoping that we will see her any minute. If I keep looking down, just checking my phone for messages. But anyway, Richard, how has your week been?
Incredibly busy as usual. As you know, I'm in the middle of moving shop premises. So that's what I've been doing today. I've been lugging all sorts of stock and units and whatever else. I need to get the premises completely clear by Saturday. But my days are numbered. I'm running out of days because of other work commitments. So I've been busting a gut with one of my guys, Rob, and my wife, Amanda. We've been blitzing everything as much as we can. But it's surprising how much stuff you accumulate, over the years. At some point, we must have put all of this into the shop. But how we manage to accumulate so much is beyond me, because it just keeps on coming. But the joys. But on a personal note, on top of that, my boiler packed in this week as well. So yeah, I'm without a boiler and hot water currently, but there we are. That's my week. How about yours, Steve?
Well, let's get back to a shoulder by shoulder view there. My week has been pretty interesting. I've taken all the videos that we've done, all the live streams, and broken them into little bits, so it's a bit more usable for people to find. So if they want to look at what's the different questions about protein kinase and mTOR or athletic performance, if you go onto my YouTube or go onto Facebook, you'll see that I've sectioned them all into short videos. So we've got some comments, by the way. But anyway, as I was saying, my week has been good. Let's do a little précis of what oxalates are, because we haven't got Sally at the moment. So what's your understanding of what an oxalate is, or do you want me to go first?
Yeah, you blitz away. Let's listen to Coach Stephen.
Well, oxalic acid is part of a plant, and plants need minerals to thrive. I mean, it really is that simple. So the oxalic acid in the plant is one of their chemical mineral. But oh, hello, we've got Sally coming in now. So what we'll do is we'll get rid of me, because that's boring, and we'll welcome Sally to the stage. Hello.
Hi. How are you?
We're good. Do you want to say hello, Rich?
Hey there, Sally. You okay?
Hi, Rich.
Great to see you.
Yes, good to see you. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for coming on.
Right. Well, we were basically filling some time in, actually, Sally, talking about what is actually an oxalate. But as you're here now, and we've only got you for 45 minutes, maybe we could start with two very simple questions, but we'll put them together. One, what actually is an oxalate? And two, why was it such a big deal for you?
Oxalate is a natural compound. Plants make it. It's in nature in lots of places, and it's toxic when you eat too much of it. And I didn't learn in school how much is too much or how it's toxic. All I knew is that it bound calcium, and you shouldn't have tea and tannins and oxalates with your meal. And it's really important to get kidney stone patients on a low oxalate diet. And I also knew that it's hard to get them on that diet, and doctors don't seem to care about it much, so it must not matter. So I got in trouble because I was ignorant about oxalate, and I shipwrecked big time and was so shocked that my long list of health problems all seemed to be connected to this problem of eating sweet potatoes every day. I took on an apparently unbalanced diet and chose sweet potatoes as my daily carb when I left the vegan diet. And that just exasperated a problem that was going on. At the time, I was so fatigued, so struggling. And by adopting sweet potatoes, I just added to my problems. And it took another, how long was it? 25 years to figure that out.
Wow. Yes. I mean, you were a trained nutritionist, weren't you, when this happened?
I went to Cornell to study nutrition. I decided to do that in 1976 when I was in 7th grade, because I realized, thanks to a science teacher, that the way you eat is everything about how you feel, and that things like cancer and heart disease really should be optional because they're not a normal part of the human experience. And that if we knew how to eat, then you could avoid all that and be more productive, have more fun, not be a patient, save some money. Like, it just made sense that nutrition would be the field to get into to help people not be sick.
So, Rich?
Yeah, I agree. It's, but I don't know about you, Sally, but it almost seems like a thankless job. It's, when you look at, the doctors that are paid, lots and lots of money, and I work with lots of doctors, and I believe that they are there for the right reasons. They get into becoming a doctor for the right reasons, but I think that they are trained by the pharmaceutical companies or trained in medication. But what I've found is that the advice that a nutritionist, an enlightened nutritionist can give can quite literally save lives. Yet we seem to be the least paid within, the nutrition or sort of medical profession. Stephen and I keep bouncing this back constantly through, the coaching sessions and training and things that we do, that it's an awful lot of free time given educating people, because people are almost, when you tell them eating spinach, is bad for you, they instantly switch off. And it's a hard hurdle to overcome. So are these difficulties that you have found yourself? I mean, obviously, you're an author of an incredible book and now gaining traction within. So whatever you seem to say now is gaining that traction, and you've gained that authority and trust within, the community. But early on, was it like that, or were you up against, other people within the community and medical profession?
Well, being into eating healthy makes you unpopular in every circle to begin with. Right. So you're already this person to turn off and not listen to. And of course, it was really interesting to get back to one of your points. At Cornell, my TAs, the teaching assistants in my nutritional biochemistry course, were all MDs, or they had finished their MD part of their education and were doing a year or so in nutrition, either to get a PhD or to enhance their chances for their residency. I'm not sure, but they uniformly told us that the dietitian status in the hospital was under that of the janitor, and that we as dietitians, that's what we were expected to become, would have to make our assessment and dietary plan feel like it was the doctor's idea in order for it to get taken seriously. So yes, both at the dining table and in the hospital, the nutritionist is not regarded as important. And yes, the message of my book, that the foods we're trusting to be healthy are actually undermining our health, is really shocking that someone can bring up this countercultural notion that is poo-pooed in every circle in medicine, online, wherever, and yet it is gaining traction. How does one get a countercultural set of scientific ideas out there and have it stick? Because it's changing lives. People literally, you said some information can literally save lives. And I have clients and followers who will tell you just that. So that makes, what was surprising to me is when I figured out what was wrong with me, I thought, well, I'm one of this odd set of people that has this little minor problem, but I'm going to research it and I'm going to start teaching about it, because whoever has this minor little odd problem, no one's going to tell them that. They have no chance of finding out from their doctor, their acupuncturist, their massage therapist, their chiropractor, their best friend, their neighbor, anybody. No one knows about this. So I thought I would just squeak a little bit and share and teach and learn. But much to my surprise, what I think I'm learning is that all of humanity is essentially oxalate poison to some degree or another.
We've got a question. Are you okay to take questions from viewers?
Certainly.
Good. That's good. Right. So Matthew here, can too much vitamin C or collagen supplementation activate, I think that would be, the oxalate pathway?
Yeah, so this question is referring to the fact that the body generates oxalate itself, and that the tissue that does most of that is the liver. So the liver makes oxalate, which is a shocking idea because everyone thinks the liver detoxes things and that the liver removes toxins, which it generally does, but not when it comes to oxalate. Oxalate is also a metabolic byproduct at low levels. So if you're not overdoing vitamin C in supplements and you're not taking collagen and you're generally healthy and not super inflamed, the body makes a small amount of oxalate, like 10 or 12 milligrams a day. But if you supplement with vitamin C or use collagen supplements, that will increase quite a bit, especially the vitamin C. The vitamin C is the dominant molecule that we call as a precursor. That's a molecule that gets transformed into something else. It's a precursor for oxalate. Vitamin C is the biggest source of we call it endogenous oxalate. That's which is produced in body cells. So yes, vitamin C is the best way to get into trouble by way of endogenous oxalate production. And even as much as a tablespoon of collagen or gelatin increases oxalate as measured by oxalate in the urine. That's how we guesstimate this process typically, is measuring urine levels after a challenge test and so on. Because the urine is the primary fluid by which we excrete the oxalate. Since we can't detox it, we have no way to transform oxalate itself. We have to just excrete it, and the kidneys have the bulk of that job.
Yeah, that's cool. Rich, did you want to follow up?
No, I was thinking my thoughts were that, I'd like to hear a little bit more about Sally's journey in regards to the transition and, what sort of things how did you notice that you were unwell originally when it came to this? Because it's, it just baffles many people that these foods, we're told spinach is a superfood, turmeric, all of these other things. And I've been guilty myself of consuming lots of these foods during my early days, gravitating into becoming ketogenic and then eventually carnivore. But I used to consume lots of spinach and kale smoothies with black pepper and turmeric. I believe that these are really good for me, and I felt amazing, but I felt amazing in spite of, and not because of, it was because of all of the other changes that I had made. It's only through laziness that I begin to, I say lazy, I shouldn't say laziness really, but if through convenience, because to cook vegetables or to make smoothies took time, whereas just to fry a steak or cook some eggs took considerably less time. So, but I realized that when I took out these plant foods and I took away these smoothies and all of these other things that I was doing that I was told was good for me, that I felt even better. And that's what led me down this rabbit hole into researching, what foods actually contain in regards to vitamins and minerals. Because we're told to me that these foods are incredibly nutrient dense, but the truth is they're not. They are incredibly low density in regards to vitamins, especially when we compare that to highly bioavailable, animal proteins. But I'd like to hear a little bit about your story and your journey, and I think the listeners would love to do so as well, if that's okay.
Sure. You brought up lots of different issues, including the idea of nutrient density, which is based on calories. and the saddest thing of all in nutrition is the lack of attention to bioavailability. Just because you can burn something up in a lab and say that there's so much calcium or whatever there doesn't mean that that's something your body can get access to and use as a nutritional substance. And that's some kind of weird fig leaf to preserve our notion that we should get the population on these plant foods, which has been going on too long. So we're manipulated in our thinking, which limits your free choice, really, when you were trying so hard to eat well. It's because of all the advice we're getting, which isn't really based on much. And, I was trying to do right by my body since I was in kindergarten. I would come home and tell my mother what they taught us in school to eat healthy. We're supposed to have so much of this or that. Because I was sick as a little kid and I knew I didn't want to be sick, and I would do whatever it takes to be well. So many of us who get in trouble with our health, we're already at risk, and we're trying to pull ourselves in a healthier direction, and it backfires. And I literally started having arthritis as a 12-year-old and some neurological symptoms. But I was also a great eater of beet greens. And I think that was happening in the summer when we were harvesting the beets and the beet greens and eating them. And I was a big eater as a kid. I could eat massive amounts of food. And I liked real food. I was a gardener by age 9. And my mom cooked everything from scratch for the most part. I mean, she did take shortcuts when we were little with the hot dogs and the Campbell's tomato soup. But, basically we weren't given a lot of, soda pop and junk food growing up. So I ate a lot of food. I didn't feel well. It became a problem in college where I developed a foot pain problem. That ended up being nearly a decade of being directly crippled and another 2 more decades of being subpar function with my feet and connective tissue. So I've been having issues that I now understand were related to oxalate most of my life, basically since puberty. And I didn't recognize it till I almost turned 50. And that was 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years ago in November when I got serious about the diet, but I had no idea. I had no urinary tract symptoms that were really a big problem, other than I had cloudy urine most all the time forever. I never had kidney stones. I didn't have UTIs, any of that. But I did eventually have on and off little bouts of genital pain, like burning and real uncomfortable. And I had a bout of that in 2009. And that led my husband to a Google search, and he found the Vulvar Pain Foundation, which is based in the US on the Atlantic coast in North Carolina and has been for 30 years, teaching a low oxalate diet for vulvar pain, other forms of genital pain for men and women. And they learned through the course of them teaching the diet and doing it themselves that connective tissue problems were related to oxalate. And so they saw this as a connective tissue disorder that oxalate was creating. And that's what was going on with my feet. I never had proper, strong connective tissue in my feet. And when you have connective tissue that's weak, that causes pain. And I had these feet that required shoes all the time. I couldn't even stand in my own kitchen in bare feet for more than 5 or 10 minutes without them aching. And that's these feet were sort of spreading, most likely under the weight of standing. And that spreading caused the pain. So all of this I had to discover late in life because I didn't know that oxalates and acidity breaks collagen, makes it oxalate lowers cellular metabolism, makes it hard for tissues to repair, and that you can get into pretty much anything that can go wrong with cells, cellular energetics, cellular metabolism, cellular redox balance. Oxalate can kick that off and keep it going indefinitely. And you can do the best you can to prop yourself up in a lifestyle that allows you to cope, but really still having a chronic problem that can be slowly, progressively degenerative. And by the time you hit your late 40s, you're having surgeries and you're having, quote, menopause and aging problems.
And I think that's the thing. People will blame the aging process on many things that have just been accumulative through so-called, healthy eating habits, which, as we know, are not healthy. But I was quite shocked because the oxalates can kill you. They're deadly.
That's true.
There's been documented cases of 4,000, as little as 4,000 milligrams of oxalates causing death. There's a few cases of 5,000, and the amount, I believe, and you may have a better understanding on this than I do, but 15,000 would probably kill an adult human.
Anybody,
pretty much immediately.
Right? Pretty much anybody, it'd be a deadly dose, right? At 15, but at 5, for some of us, that can also mean death. Might take a few hours, a few days. Some people are tolerating diets that are at 3,000 with the spinach smoothies and the almonds and the plant-based keto is probably the highest oxalate diet we have because people get so reliant on the nuts and the greens, the low carb fruits and so on. You can get into berries and then throw in the turmeric, which isn't, people can get in big trouble attempting to do something well. And that's what's so immoral and just so heartbreaking for me is that trying really hard to do the right thing could backfire. And I think a lot of people some of the cases in the literature, most of the cases in the literature that we see, these case reports, are people that were attempting to prevent illness or to, ameliorate an illness by doing these antioxidant diets and things like that.
Yeah.
It's the thing with oxalate dumping is it does get blamed for a lot of things, and which is a very neat segue to one of the questions here. The carnivore cabbie is saying, listening, hoping my diagnosis of gout is oxalate dumping. Is it possible that gout symptoms or gout-like symptoms could be oxalates?
Definitely. Oxalates on the way in and on the way out, because oxalates cause a chronically high exposure to oxalate through your diet or vitamin C or collagen will create a situation where oxalate's built up in your body. That oxalosis, that oxalate toxic burden in your body will keep your oxalate levels high. So even after you've changed your diet, you may still have a very high oxalate situation and a cyclically toxic scenario for a long time to come. And I wrote a little blog on my website about the gout issue because I had gout in college. I was a vegetarian. I was very fit and trim despite having crippled feet. My feet didn't make me fat right away. I eventually did go up 2 dress sizes, not being able to walk and being stressed and started eating bagels to cope. But, I thought how odd, since at the time gout was blamed on maleness, obesity, meat consumption, and alcohol consumption. And none of those things were me. How can I have gout? And then it turns out that the body may be using uric acid to dissolve oxalate crystals. So uremia or uric acid follows an oxalate problem, probably. And you can have both high oxalate and high uric acid, both of them contributing to various types of kidney stones and also contributing to gout. Gout is just a generalized inflammatory reaction to crystals. There's at least 5 kinds of crystals that can form in tissues. And any kind of inflammation that's involving joint tissues in reaction to a crystal is a form of gout. We call the other non-uric acid gouts pseudogout, and because we have a drug for uric acid gout. We don't have drugs for the others, so we just kind of dismiss them. But the truth is that gout is just an inflammatory reaction to crystals in joints. Oxalate is a very common crystal in joint that can get transformed into uric acid crystal as the body's trying to remove it. We think there's very little science looking into this. There's not necessarily the incentive to do the science to be able to say with proof.
I think one of the things I would say was, I was low carb 10 years ago. Basically, my history, you don't know me very well, Sally, but I was doing everything perfectly. I was an athlete like you and, doing the skim milk and porridge oats and fruit and not touching red meat, no fat, personal trainer running 3 times a week, 10 miles. And I was getting fatter, sicker, pre-diabetic. I had a big rash here, a coronary artery calcium scan of 639, never smoked, never drunk. So your story, when you went, well, none of that's me. I was the poster child for the food guidelines, and it absolutely killed me. So then when I went low carb and then keto and finally carnivore about 5 years ago, I was still very skeptical about oxalate dumping. Yes, I was the same as Rich. I was an idiot. I did all the smoothies and all that and turmeric and black pepper because it makes it more bioavailable. And then one day I had a crystal. Actually, you can see I was looking at the wrong bit because I've got a mirror on my camera. But yeah, and I started having dumping out of my own eye. So I was very skeptical until that happened. And I thought, wow, I'm getting this. And then I wanted to mitigate the pain because it was quite uncomfortable, actually. And we've had loads of people asking these sort of questions. So if you are experiencing oxalate dumping and once a week man, oh, by the way, when you first came on, there were hundreds of messages just telling you how wonderful you are. We would have possibly filled up a whole hour of those messages. So I'm just sticking with the actual questions. A once a week man who has previously said he's not weak anymore, and it's thanks to you. He's been oxalate dumping for a couple of years now. Would 1 square of dark chocolate a day be a good dose to slow this? And if you could broaden that out to what is the best way to slow it, answer that question maybe, and then is there other ways to slow down oxalate dumping?
This oxalate dumping thing is really phenomenal. The word dumping was coined by Susan Owens, and it really refers to an extreme event of high purging from the tissue. So this is in the tissues, and some probably major inflammatory cytokine storm and so on is encouraging multiple tissues to clear at the same time. This is very dangerous. It's a form of intoxication, and you don't want that to go on. So it's very important if you're having extreme episodes of pain and fatigue, and when you're really sure it's oxalates, the way you would know that is that you might see some outward signs. So cloudy urine can be confirmation that what you're going through, which usually involves a mood change. Usually when you're oxalate clearing in a heavy way, you've got neuroinflammation that causes changes in your attitude and your mood. You become pretty despondent, despairing, your future is dark, and your ability to solve problems and handle the situation goes way down, and your belief that it has anything to do with oxalate disappears. So if you think you're dying and you need your elbow to cut off, that could be a sign that you're clearing oxalates. So yeah, and it's usually very painful. So if you have a lot of pain and mood changes and energy dip, and you see the cloudy urine, or you find tartar in the teeth, I recommend people check behind the incisors each morning and see if a lot of tartar collected recently. Chip it off so you can get a fresh look tomorrow. That could be a sign of high blood levels of oxalate in the body. So if the tissues are releasing oxalate into the blood, chances are it might affect the tartar in your teeth. It can affect the amount of junk that collects in your eye overnight if there's a lot of it, or if even stuck on your face. That could be oxalate clearing. Gritty or burning stools could be a sign of oxalate clearing. And skin things, little rashes and boils. Like you say, sometimes people release whole crystals from their eye area and from their skin, their scalp, jaw pain, facial pain, bone pain. These can all be signs of the oxalate clearing episodes. You do not want to let them carry on or be really extreme, because it is causing additional vascular stress and damage. So you do want to slow this down. And it just seems to be that the body's got this mechanism for knowing when you're eating oxalate, and that puts it in a holding mode or a sequestration mode to try to keep it out of the blood and keep the kidneys under reasonable workload. When you go really low for a long time, depending on the other resources you have, and I think literally that a low carb diet and a low mineral intake will delay the oxalate clearing. And I've heard people who have been carnivore for years and years finally seeing a sign 3, 4, 5, or 6 years out after they've been off oxalates pretty much 100%, except a lot of people hang on to a little bit of tea and chocolate in their carnivore diet. And that is useful to be depleting some oxalate. It's a little tricky because there's not necessarily an exact amount of food or exact amount of oxalate in a particular situation. You have to kind of work with your body to see where the lever is. So it's kind of like working the gas pedal and clutch on your car. You need to know how to kind of work with them and feel the body response. But if you're really sick, a good answer is to start adding in some oxalate every day. I usually recommend you start with a dinner meal, because the clearing and housekeeping that's happening in the body to get rid of the oxalate poisoning tends to happen while we're resting overnight. So if you're on a normal cycle and you sleep at night, that's the time of day your body's more likely to do this. So by timing your oxalate dosing for around the end of the day, you might get more effective response, but you need enough. And you need a food that you're not also allergic to. So you got to be careful about that. You also need to vary it enough, because if you took that same square of chocolate every single day, your body would just get used to that as normal and ignore it. So it may not be strong enough. So you may need to pulse it every third day. You may need to double the amount of oxalate. If you're too sick and tired to be thinking about, I should have 4 sweet potato fries or 3 cups of tea or something, you could keep something like beet juice in the refrigerator and take a jigger of beet juice, something simple. Tea is a very popular thing to use if you tolerate it. You probably need to use double strength by using 2 tea bags. It's the amount of tea, not the amount of water, that matters. So to increase the strength of the tea, you need to use more tea. And you play around. I usually ask people to start with about 30 milligrams of oxalate, which is almost 2 tea bags worth of oxalate. And off the top of my head, without knowing the percent of dark chocolate, I can't really tell you how much chocolate it is. But the amount is something you can start figuring out. If adding it isn't helping you, you're probably not doing enough.
Brilliant. We have a question here, which I'm very ignorant of, but that's why you're here, because there are supplements that help with this issue, like Chancer Pydra, which I think is a herbal thing, or phosphorus, and others. Yet no one ever talks about it. Why? Does that ring a bell with you, Sally?
Yes. Chancre Pedra is a very popular, what they call stone breaker herb. It's said to help you break up kidney stones. It's not necessary, because really the things you need to break up stones are citrate and enough calcium, and you need your pH in your body controlled. So it's one way to do it, but not my preferred way. I'm not really a big fan of playing around with herbs. They're drugs and they're complicated, and it's something you could become allergic to. It's simpler to make sure you have enough citrate in the urine. And you can do that using bicarb and using citric acid in supplements like magnesium and potassium and calcium citrate. Lemon juice is very helpful and well documented to have enough citrate. If you get a half cup of lemon juice a day, which is a lot, you can do a lot to break up kidney stones and help you avoid getting kidney stones with basically keeping the pH right in your urine. And there's lots of tools for doing that. You don't necessarily need a magic herb to do it. Some people think it's benefiting them, but the literature is pretty equivocal about whether it is even effective or not. I'd say that the citrate supplements, we have the documentation for. I see it routinely in people. Calcium very clearly supports lower pain and supports oxalate clearing from the body. I have guesses about the mechanism, but no one's actually proven the various mechanisms involved. Even topical calcium lowers pain and helps with the symptoms of like itching and these kinds of things that can happen.
Now, people are going to think this is scripted, Sally, because Cami, who is actually responsible for you being here, so thank you, Cami, that was great, has said you have to discuss the calcium supplementation, as you just did, with Stephen and Rich. So Richard in particular, I don't know if you know, but Richard runs the Keto Pro shop, designs his own electrolytes and supplements. So this is a big deal. So did you want to fill out that question for me, Rich?
Yeah, so I'll just give you a quick background of my history coming into this as well. It's now that Stephen's given his. So I used to be clinically obese, type 2 diabetic, suffered with chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, arthritic pains, daily debilitating migraines that would make me blind. And in my mid to late 20s, I could barely walk up the stairs without stopping or being severely out of breath. Super long story short, I adopted originally a low-carb lifestyle, then ketogenic, and now I'm carnivore. But I quit my job. I sold all the property that I owned to put into a coaching business. And then I began creating supplements like electrolytes, amongst other things, in order to help people maintain a low-carb, ketogenic or carnivore lifestyle. I do work with the PHC, the Public Health Collaboration, the Noakes Foundation, and Diabetes UK, amongst other things. But I was through this lifestyle change. I went on to become a professional athlete, British and European champion in men's physique bodybuilding of all things, which I've retired from now. I've gone into running and cycling, so a complete 180. But this has completely changed my life. And just to echo something Steve said earlier, I did all of the kale and spinach smoothies. I was adding, and Steve said about adding the black pepper to increase bioavailability. But I mean, what that actually does is it blocks the enzyme glucuronosyl transferase, which is what allows us to excrete that toxin from the body, isn't it? So adding black pepper to turmeric and spinach smoothies just further exacerbates the problem. But these things we're told are antioxidants, but they're not. They're pro-oxidants. They activate the NRF2 pathway, which is an oxidative stress pathway. So we've been fed, pun intended, these fallacies our entire lifetime, about consuming spinach and kale. And coming back to a point that, you and I mentioned earlier, in the UK, spinach comes in 200-gram pouches. And 100 grams of spinach can contain up to somewhere 14 to 1600 milligrams of oxalate. So that one pack could contain over 3,000 milligrams. And yeah, it differences depending on the sample size that's been tested. But when you talk, 4,000 to 5,000 milligrams is capable of killing a human being. And then, and I was one of these people, I was adding it to a blender with turmeric and black pepper and kale and everything else. And I think, what the hell was I doing? But I felt at the time way better than I ever had previously. But again, this was because I was ketogenic, and the creation of beta hydroxybutyrate was lowering inflammation, and I was benefiting with cognitive improvements and all these other things. So I was healthier and fitter in spite of and not because of. But when I moved away from all of these things, I became even healthier and fitter, and my blood show this, But what I found early on is that obviously oxalate poisoning is a problem, and then the dumping issue. But and I know that you're a big advocate of calcium supplementation in order to combat the dumping effect. But I found an alternative method which I wanted to run by you. Is it okay if I share my screen and run through some bits, and you can probably pick some holes in what I show you with this? But this is my thinking behind. Let me see if I can share the screen there, and Steve can allow me access. Where are we? So this story sort of, let me know when it's sharing there, Steve, because I can't tell. There we are. Okay. I'll leave these on the side because I've literally, and forgive me, this is super basic. I've literally just thrown this thing. I've been busy moving premises all day today. So I just thrown this together to give you an idea. And the guys who are watching some sort of visual aid. But it's what I've found. This is my own experience and what I've found with clients and customers that I've been working with. So, you gravitate into this low carb ketogenic lifestyle and everything is brilliant for a few days. You're feeling absolutely incredible. But then you start to experience things like headaches and fatigue and feeling nauseous. And as we know, it's keto flu, and it's to do with the lack of electrolytes, particularly sodium. And because many of us come from this area of insulin resistance, and it's insulin that drives most essential hypertension. Essential hypertension is driven by insulin resistance. But when insulin is elevated, it pulls sodium from the nephrons in the kidneys back into the blood. Wherever sodium goes, water follows, and it contributes to the high blood pressure, which is why we fear so much sodium. But when we begin this low carb ketogenic journey, and I'm looking on this screen over there now because it's on this screen, so apologies. But this insulin drops, and then it signals the kidneys to release sodium from the body, from 4 points in the nephrons in the kidneys, and it leads to keto flu. So now we're feeling fatigued and we're feeling nauseousness. So, but we don't want to give up. And this is where most people
throw in one little point here.
Fire away.
And that is high oxalate also causes the kidneys to waste sodium.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So while we're eating high oxalate and also while we're clearing high oxalate, you cause additional losses of sodium.
Yeah. Which further drives, I guess, all of these negative downstream.
Which is sometimes why it's hard to tell if you have keto flu or oxalate dumping, because a lot of the same derangements can be going on for both reasons.
So how long could this oxalate dumping, I mean, it isn't something that occurs, I'm guessing possibly it does within a few days or a few weeks with some people, but it can go on for prolonged periods of time. So what's the longest you've seen, the effects of oxalate dumping occur?
Well, there hasn't been a very long period of people awarely using a low oxalate diet for anything other than kidney stones. So we don't have a long history to go by. I'm still clearing oxalates, and I'll be 10 years in a few weeks.
Wow.
I believe strongly that my back and tendons of my shoulders, pecs, and the spine are still struggling with oxalate deposits.
Wow. So incredible. It's a lifetime of abuse, I guess, isn't it?
It's actually, you can create what is changes to your physiology, your tissues, and your metabolic well-being by eating high oxalate that might have some indelible impact on your health for the rest of your life. And that's why it's so important to think about managing the clearing process versus just trying to power through it. Powering through it is just toxic. You're better off in that asymptomatic stage you were in when you were eating all that high oxalate food. You don't always get symptoms if the body's carefully partitioned it off and wrapped it up and has it buried in your spine. To some degree, some small amount of that is perfectly tolerated, and it will keep you going until a proper 95-year-old type age of final demise, right? You're not going to be perfect in this life, and you're certainly not going to be perfect after you've been poisoned with oxalates. So too bad you're not still sharing your slides. I just thought it's interesting to compare the keto flu and the sodium and the electrolyte derangements and adjustments that go on with both the keto, because so often now it's coming together now that more and more people are picking up on the idea that meat's not what's killing you. Meat has lots of nutrients and it's a healthy food. I think that's the main message in the carnivore world is, hey guys, you don't have to be terrorized by meat. It used to be you could dress up as bacon and be a frightening being on Halloween here in the US, right? People were so unnecessarily terrorized by the idea that meat and butter were going to kill them.
Yeah, which is crazy. Absolutely crazy. Do you think that, that's the reason that many people who begin a ketogenic journey and why a lot of the research is negative? Because, we see the benefit. I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands of clients who have conferred massive benefit to being keto and carnivore. But I'm not a big fan of the standard version of, a ketogenic diet, which preferences so the Dr. Berg approach, lots of, I've
nuts, spinach, berries.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Berg, I think he's 80% of the way there, in my opinion. But I think he's lost it with the 6 to 8 cups of vegetables or whatever he's on these days. And I think that when people are adopting that, I think these other plant toxins, phytoalexins, are causing all sorts of issues in the body. And I think this is the reason that most people, maybe don't perform as well as they could on a ketogenic lifestyle, because it's heavily driven in the media by, vegetables. And I prioritize protein. I build my meals around protein. I don't track macros. I don't track calories. As we know, a calorie technically doesn't really exist. But it's within this society that is heavily driven by counting calories. And I don't count anything. I don't track anything. I just eat food as nature intended. Everything that comes in nature, protein comes with fat. So as long as I'm eating protein, I'm getting enough fat that, the way that nature intended, because nature gives us this perfectly packaged present, protein with fat, and almost equal amounts. If we look at an egg, for example, it's almost equal amounts of protein to fat, a piece of steak, chicken breast with the skin on, salmon, all these oily fish, whatever it may be. So I don't even track anything. But this community of people who are heavily predominating plants in their ketogenic lifestyle, I think, do you think that could be one of the reasons that they maybe don't see some of the positive results that, that you and I and Stephen have? And
well, I think it's really important to recognize that all of our thinking now is still short term. Like I said, we haven't been doing the low oxalate diet for very long, so we don't have hundreds and thousands of people who've done it for 30 years to see what the long term, how we might project the course of the illness. And that's very true with keto diets, even though we've been pushing carb restriction for 45 years easily. And I do know people personally who have tried their best to do it all right, and they've added in all the fasting and the sauna and the proper, spacing of their gym visits and all that, and they're still 300 pounds and feel like miserable failures. I think we have to admit that the technologies they're using is failing them and not gaslight them as like they're doing something wrong. So we have to recognize that we don't have one answer that works for everyone, and we have to find what works for them and recognize that despite really quite huge popularity in carb restriction, we haven't seen that really affect the public health numbers. We're not seeing a discernible trend in public health where people are generally less obese or insulin resistance is improving. In fact, there is some science that suggests that sharp carb restriction increases carb intolerance, and it takes somewhere from 5 weeks to 5 months or more to retrain your metabolism to tolerate carbs again. So we don't even have the knowledge like, well, if you need to get off keto and have a more balanced amount of carbs available for your cells to get their energy back, because sometimes the suppression is right there at the cellular energetics, and now you've lowered your metabolism too. It might take them 6 months or a year to adjust back to a diet that is still high meat and high nutrient, but also includes carbs. We need to make that a possibility for people. And so it's important that we are still in a humble listening mindset, so we can find ways so everyone can find their rightful place of feeling well and not being sick and fat and stuck.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks
This
for
is,
that. I've got
this is one of
another.
the,
Sorry,
oh, sorry.
Rich.
That's just one of the points. Sorry, man.
Yeah.
Go on.
Just people putting so many questions up. I just wanted to make sure that, because we haven't got Sally for long. Carl's just quickly asking, have you ever come across anyone getting
yes. This is a
teeth
very common issue with the sinuses and the jaw and the face. This is all high vascular tissue, full of calcium, very attracted to oxalate. We pretty much all have some form of oxalate damage in the roots of our teeth or our jaw. And if you are now on a low oxalate diet, or you went from like plant keto to carnivore keto, or you are likely to get some episodes with some, how that eye crystal hurt a lot. The mouth pain can be intense. You're going to feel like you need your tooth pulled. It can be quite difficult. It might last, up and down a bit for 6 months or more. So if you have the tooth sensitivity, check it out. Make sure you don't have an infection, but be very careful about the dentist rushing to the conclusion that it is an infection. Get 2 or 3 opinions. Don't give up on a tooth prematurely, because mostly the low oxalate diet, whatever form you do, especially if you're getting enough citric acid, will improve the dentition and help you repair your jaw and keep your teeth.
That's a great answer. I'm sure Carl will be very happy to have that question answered. Co-create happy. Thank you for the super chat. Can oxalates trigger heart and or kidney issues like AFib, heart rate irregularities, lower heart functionality rates, blood clots, lower kidney creatine and filtration rates? Nice big question.
Yes. Yes, most definitely. The pacemaker in the heart requires an even level of calcium in the blood, and the interstitial fluids need the right electrolytes, and oxalate messes up electrolytes locally around the heart tissues and in the blood generally, and can contribute to AFib and complete heart failure. It's called heart block when the electricity of the cells that maintain the heart rate fail. And that can be a form of a heart attack. And that's well documented in the literature. In fact, with these cases of dietary oxalate poisoning, the thing that ultimately kills the person is the heart attack. And there's plenty of evidence of the heart muscle tissue collecting oxalate and having long-term fibrotic problems. So when you get fibrosis, the valves don't work as well, and you get vascular changes. The capillary beds all over the body, including in the eyeballs, can be degenerated by the presence of oxalate in the blood. So even while you're dumping oxalate, you could be degenerating the capillaries that feed your cardiac tissues, your eyeballs, and everything else that you love. That should be held near and dear to you. Your magical body that's doing its best to cope with toxic foods.
Well, yes, I think Landers here has a magical body, because he asked they asked a question last week. Anyway, I do have a question this week while Sally Norton is on. I am carnivore, but there is a doctor that is stating eating dark green vegetables to promote nitric oxide. Is it worth trying?
The body can make and manage its nitric oxide without you thinking you need to get in there and punch it with something. A good way, though, to improve vascular health is through sauna. Sauna restores an enzyme that lets you make nitric oxide. So if you feel like you're slow if your nitric oxide control and metabolism in your body isn't as great as it could be, do a sauna a few days a week. Or really, sauna is best done frequently. If you can spend a little time sweating every day, that's probably good for the nitric oxide issue. And you don't need vegetables to beat yourself into it. This idea that some little theory can be turned into a lifestyle hack is fantasy.
Yeah. I think we attribute too many of the benefits. Like we quite often say that one vegetable will confer such a benefit, but then we don't account for all of the all of the rest of the downstream deleterious impacts of all the other phytoalexins and plant toxins that come with it. There are other ways to increase nitric oxide. But would you like me to carry on with this thing quickly? Because I know that how long have we got you for, Sally? I think
just a few more minutes. I have to give a big group discussion today for my folks. So
right, I will smash through this really quickly, Steve, if that's okay. And coming on to this, basically, we're in this position where we've just adopted a low carb ketogenic lifestyle, suffering with a keto flare. We've hit the internet, and we've established that it's because sodium has dropped. So now, we've been told all our life that sodium is detrimental to our health. But we consult the oracle, we look at Mr. Google and search YouTube, and we come across studies such as this one. And this study covers 17 countries, over 100,000 participants, and it shows an inverse association, basically showing that the lower our sodium consumption, the higher our risk of death, with the sweet spot being between 4,000 to 6,000 milligrams, and arguably even 10,000 milligrams per day is more optimal. And the thing with this study is that it measures excretion and not consumption. So we can argue that, what is lost is at least what is consumed. So now we understand how important these electrolytes are, particularly sodium. We begin to supplement, and now we begin to feel a lot better on our keto or low carb carnivore type journey. We're going along merrily. And I think you're going to love the next picture. Suddenly we start suffering with oxalate dumping. So back on to Mr. Google, consult the oracle. We realize what's happening, and we understand that there's an issue to address. But now we're in a state of elevated sodium. And the thing with sodium is excess sodium depletes potassium. So our sodium's up, potassium's down. Now, low potassium, it can impair insulin secretion. It can increase hypertension, lead to shortness of breath, increase blood pressure, because potassium is a vasodilator. It depletes calcium from the bones, which can lead to further issues in regards to kidney stones. Potassium is imperative for waste management within the body, brain function, fatigue, all of these things. So now we're in this situation where we're taking excess sodium. So sodium's up, potassium's down, and calcium's down because this potassium is depleting the calcium. So now we understand that citrate, as you mentioned earlier, is a good tool to use. So we begin to supplement with magnesium citrate. But magnesium citrate can have another downstream deleterious effect and lead to toilet problems or bowel problems. So we revisit and look at calcium. And calcium is, a fantastic supplementation. It's got a massive affinity, as you say, to oxalates and helps with combating these, the effects of oxalate dumping. And apologies, I'm rushing through this because I know you're short of time. But the issue with excess calcium is that depletes magnesium. So now there's a specific ratio that the cells need within the body. And what I found when I was supplementing with calcium is that it led to excess cramping because the cells are now out of the ratio in regards to calcium. It affects two of the proteins within the body, within the muscle, and it leads to cramp. So I was suffering with excess cramping. These proteins, myosin and actin, one's excitatory and one relaxes, and that's what magnesium does, isn't it? Magnesium relaxes the muscle, and calcium excites it, and that's the issue that I found with calcium supplementation, that I was suffering with this excitatory effect. But also, now that we're in this state of depleted magnesium, and I'll read this out really quickly. So magnesium assists in the activation of vitamin D, which helps regulate calcium and phosphate homeostasis to influence the growth and maintenance of bones. All of the enzymes that metabolize vitamin D seem to require magnesium, which act as a cofactor in the enzymatic reaction in the liver and kidneys. Deficiency in either of these nutrients is reported to be associated with various disorders such as skeletal deformities, cardiovascular disease, and metabolic syndrome. So now, because we've increased the calcium, it's put this magnesium out of whack. So it can lead to all of these other downstream effects. And this was the biggest one for me. Excess calcium consumption, both in supplementation and in diet, can lead to an increase of cardiovascular disease by as much as 15%, with one of these reporting dietary calcium intake of 700 to 1,000 milligrams per day can increase this effect of cardiovascular disease. So then I look at a standard sort of ketogenic or animal-based lifestyle. I'm pretty much carnivore. All I eat is beef. But, early on, I was eating lots of steak, cheese, and eggs. And I think, it's safe to say that that's probably a standard sort of protocol for people. Steak, steak and eggs and cheese. So when we look at the calcium content within the steak, I don't eat 100 grams of steak. So I'd eat around 500 grams, if not even more. I probably eat close to a kilogram of beef per day. But one meal, I may eat about 500, which contains 95 milligrams of calcium. 100 grams of cheese would contain 720. And 4 eggs, which I don't think is an awful lot, would contain 100 milligrams. So now we're knocking on the door of 1,000 milligrams just through dietary values of calcium. And as we saw in one of those studies, that this can contribute to cardiovascular disease. So the last thing that I want to do is supplement with calcium. But even if we would half that cheese down to 50 grams, there's still over 500, I think it's around 550 milligrams of calcium. So I'm always concerned then, and this is why obviously supplementing with calcium for me led to this this effect of cramping and things, So I began looking at the ratios of minerals in animal protein. So this is strip steak and ground beef. And this is a range of liver, heart, and kidney from calves, beef, and lamb. And I've put these into a rough Excel spreadsheet. So when we look at the calcium in ground beef, for example, is 11.6. So the magnesium is higher in nature than the calcium. Sodium higher again, and potassium around 4 times higher than the sodium. And we see similar ratios in the lamb, etc. So these are the ratios that nature sort of gives us, isn't it, as we live this carnivore ketogenic lifestyle. So what I decided to do is start increasing potassium citrate in particular. And we know that has an affinity to oxalate and can help with oxalate dumping. And it can also help combat kidney stones, as this study highlights. The higher the potassium intake, the less reoccurrence of calcium oxalate stones occurred. So my theory was that if we consume potassium citrate over calcium, this would then put everything back into nature's natural balance where we're consuming. And these pillars are not to they're not to scale. I've just chucked them in there to show the potassium, as nature intended, is 4 times as high as sodium, magnesium less, and calcium less again. But it seems that whichever one that we increase seems to kick some of the others out of whack, unless it's potassium that we increase further. And given the fact that we're in a society or live in a lifestyle that is incredibly low in potassium, this is where I found that supplementing with potassium citrate alleviated, it seemed to alleviate the effect of oxalate dumping for me and the leg cramps, and it just put everything else back into what I felt to be a natural form of homeostasis as nature intended. And that's what I wanted to get your thoughts on. Instead of supplementing with excess calcium, could we attain the same benefits through a potassium supplementation, potassium citrate in particular?
This is a big topic, and we can't cover it in depth in the last 2 minutes that we've got together. So we should come back around to it. And I have to say, I am a big fan of potassium. Potassium is very important for restoring the bones and teeth that have been destroyed by the oxalates. It's important in every way, as you said, vascular dilation and hypertension and kidney stone prevention. There's proof for all of that. I have been a big fan of potassium and encourage people to really pay attention and stay diligent with it. Potassium is an intracellular ion. You need to get it taken up by your cells. It's taken up better when there's insulin. That's when the cells know that there's a meal. That's when they do their best eating. So it's good to take potassium citrate with food because it lowers the chance it becomes a stomach irritant, and it improves the chance that it can get to where it needs to be, which is inside your heart muscle, inside your bone cells, etc. Now, calcium, the main reason it's so beneficial to oxalates is because it helps the colon excrete oxalate. Most calcium at best is absorbed at about 20% of what you take is absorbed. The reason we take calcium is so that it stays in the intestinal tract. We're not taking to absorb it. Calcium is an extracellular ion. And if you look more broadly, rather than just pick out one study, but if you look at review studies, the best conducted review studies that look at hundreds of studies show that taking calcium, whether it's a supplement or food, lowers mortality, heart disease mortality, all those others. So I'm not sure that the denominator based on that whole theory is that calcium will create heart disease. And I don't think that the science would necessarily concur with your conclusion. So we need to stay open to the fact that calcium can be useful, particularly in a situation where we know we have oxalate poisoning and we're trying to manage it. We are careful about calcium supplementation with oxalate because it literally promotes the clearing. And a little bit of calcium supplementation can make someone feel badly because it can turn on the oxalate clearing. So that's why so many carnivores get away with a zero oxalate diet without dumping, because they're not taking the calcium. That doesn't mean that taking calcium is really the problem. It does mean that they're sitting on a pile of unstable oxalate in the body's needing a tool to get it going. And so you got to be careful with calcium just because it could promote the clearing. And that's often, it's what I was saying before about accelerator and clutch. If you're going to start adding calcium, which will lower pain and help you sleep, and for many people with the oxalate problem that I work with, that's what it does for them. It even can help with their cramps. But you may need to be adding in more oxalate at the same time, but not literally at the same time. Like you need to separate it out, because we're adding oxalate as a signal to tell the body, don't clear out of the tissues because we're still eating oxalate, but here's some calcium in case you want to excrete some oxalate. So we're literally using calcium as a binder in the colon to help the colon become an excretion route for oxalate in the body. So there is plenty of evidence both in the literature and in practical application where calcium can be useful. But you're right that the electrolyte balance can be tricky to get right and can be a moving target. The truth is that calcium dysregulation in the body is really a matter of cell membrane function, because the cell membrane partitions calcium to be an extracellular ion. And when the when the membranes of the cells are damaged, they can suddenly be leaky and calcium rushes in. And of course, calcium and oxalate follow each other around. So when oxalate gets into a cell, calcium follows it and vice versa. So oxalate is a major problem with causing calcium dysregulation in the body. It's less about how much is in the diet as it is how much oxalate is in there, messing up the cell's ability to control calcium. And that's where you see odd calcifications in the vascular system and elsewhere can be a product of the oxalate poisoning. So it's a kind of a messy story to tell, because you can have the theory based on completely ignoring the oxalate problem, and we don't have enough science that shows how all these derangements work. But you see it in the more fundamental research and in the case studies how oxalate is causing this dysregulation of calcium. So it's complicated, and again, there isn't one answer for everyone. But from a point of view of preventing and reversing oxalate poisoning, calcium remains a tool to use. But like you said, in some cases, it's not the time to be playing with calcium.
Yeah, but
Sally, thank you so much for that. Rich, we've got our 8 o'clock on Rumble to do, and Sally said she's got to go.
Yeah, and we need to give Sally a shout out as well, and a mention with her book and everything. But Sally, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting.
Likewise, I'm looking forward to getting to know you both more in the future.
Yes, brilliant. I think this is a topic we could speak about for hours and hours, isn't it? But
for sure. I don't get tired of thinking about it, because I have to witness the devastating harm that the high oxalate foods are doing to people. And it's unfortunate that the keto world is still pushing high oxalate foods, again, because people are trying to do what they're told is the right thing. I wish we could get our story straight.
Yeah.
Well, they need to read your book. So we've had the image of your book, and there'll be links in the description to be able to buy the book. And I just want to thank you again for your time. And I hope we can have you back, because there's many, many people already messaging saying Sally needs to come back. So that was great. Thank you.
Lovely to be with you all. Thank you.
Yes, you too.
Oh, and I just want to let you know, if anyone out there likes the book and likes what they're learning about oxalate, it would do us all a great service if we want to help others to do reviews on toxic superfoods, so that more and more people can find this information and not stay in the dark like I was for so long. We have a great opportunity to prevent some misery if people could find this topic. So thank you.
I agree. Fantastic. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you. I'm going to press end stream. That's great. Yeah. Well done.
Brilliant.
He survived one of